The rhythm of Genesis chapter 5 is a graveyard toll. 8 words repeat like a drumbeat over early human history. And he died. Adam lived 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 912 years, and he died. Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared. The bell rings the exact same way for every patriarch in the bloodline. Stop at the 7th man. Genesis 5:21 shifts the rhythm. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. Verse 22 drops the anomaly. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. Verse 24 seals the paradox. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Read that again. He was not. The canonical text offers no sickness, no violence, no gradual fading of breath. Just a sudden, absolute extraction from the physical plane. A man simply vanishes. But watch what the text does just before the disappearance. The King James says Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah. The Hebrew word for walked is halak. It doesn't mean a casual afternoon stroll. It means a continuous, obsessive, unbroken manner of life. A relentless pacing alongside the Creator. Sit with that. For his first 65 years, Enoch was an ordinary man, living an ordinary life in the pre-flood world. Then, a rupture, a violent pivot. At age 65, something terrified or transformed him so deeply that he spent the next 3 centuries in uninterrupted militant devotion. He becomes the Bible's first apocalyptic prophet, predicting fire and judgment decades before Noah is even born. What turned him? Genesis gives us the sudden pivot, but it stays completely silent on the cause. The canonical text locks the door on what Enoch saw in his 65th year. But there is another record. First Enoch is an ancient Jewish writing, a massive text preserved whole for centuries inside the Ethiopian Bible. It was revered by the early church, quoted by the brother of Jesus in the book of Jude, and found buried in the jars of the Qumran caves. It does not rewrite Genesis. It expands it. And in its 83rd chapter, first Enoch pulls back the curtain on the exact moment the patriarch's mind was fractured. It was not a peaceful awakening. Picture it. Long before he was the man who vanished, Enoch is a young man, sleeping in the house of his grandfather Mahalalel. The world outside is heavy with the growing corruption of the pre-flood era, though the judgment of the waters has not yet been announced. In the dark of his grandfather's house, Enoch closes his eyes, and the earth drops out from under him. He receives what scholars call the first dream vision. It is a nightmare of such catastrophic, cosmic violence that it will dictate the next 300 years of his life. He sees the physical foundations of the earth collapse, and at the center of the wreckage, he watches massive, ancient trees being violently uprooted and hurled into a bottomless abyss. Trees falling into the dark. That is the image that breaks him. That is the timber that changes human history. But a falling tree in an ancient apocalyptic vision is never just a piece of wood. If we want to understand why Enoch woke up screaming, we have to look at what those roots were holding on to. One suppressed nightmare splits a patriarch's life in 2, launching a 300-year walk toward a sudden disappearance. The vision begins not with water, but with the earth itself giving way under the weight of something too heavy to stand. What exactly did the young Enoch see swallowing the physical world in his grandfather's house? Picture the room. It is night. The 5th generation of humanity is asleep. Enoch is not yet the prophet of doom. He is not yet the man who relentlessly walks with God. He is young, still unmarried, still decades away from fathering Methuselah. He is lying in the house of his grandfather, Mahalalel. First Enoch dates this moment with absolute precision. Chapter 83, verse 2 records Enoch later telling his son, "Before I took thy mother Edna, I saw in a vision on my bed. He is a boy, resting in the quiet of a world that is beginning to rot, though the final judgment has not yet been spoken aloud." He closes his eyes, and the sky tears open. We have been conditioned to think of the ancient judgment purely as water. The story of Noah dominates our imagination. A boat, 40 days of rain, a rising tide. But Enoch's first vision, the nightmare that will permanently alter his bloodline, does not start with a storm. It starts with the structure of reality failing. Watch what the text does. First Enoch 83, verse 3. "And I saw the heaven falling down upon the earth, and when it fell upon the earth, I saw how the earth was swallowed up in a great abyss." Read that again. Heaven falling upon the earth. The firmament, the canopy of the sky, collapsing like an immense physical weight, crushing the ground beneath it until the crust of the world cracks and plunges into the deep. This is not a flood. This is a violent, total deconstruction of Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God separated the heavens from the earth. He established boundaries. Form out of the void, Enoch is watching creation run in reverse. The boundaries are shattering. The architecture of the cosmos is collapsing in on itself. And then, the focus of the dream tightens. As the earth sinks into the abyss, Enoch doesn't just see a blur of dirt and stone. The vision zooms in. His eyes are forced to watch something specific in the wreckage. First Enoch 83 details the collapse of mountains and the sinking of hills, but the camera of the dream locks onto the timber, the high trees. He watches the tallest, most imposing trees of the earth being violently torn from their soil, their deep roots severed, and their massive trunks hurled headlong into the bottomless dark. Same earth, different judgment. We typically read the pre-flood judgment as a cleansing bath, a reset. Enoch sees it as an extraction, a violent uprooting of something deeply embedded in the physical world. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact, but the ancient Jewish scribes who preserved this text believed they were recording the exact sequence of Enoch's psychological break. This is the moment. The ordinary boy vanished in his own mind, and the apocalyptic prophet woke up. He is trapped in the sleep state, paralyzed on his grandfather's bed, watching the high trees of the earth thrown into the abyss. A boy lies paralyzed in the dark, watching the high canopy of the earth violently hurled into a bottomless deep. But in ancient apocalyptic literature, a towering tree with deep roots is rarely just made of wood. What exactly was hiding in the branches of the pre-flood world, heavy enough to drag the ground itself into the abyss? The bed in Mahalalel's house is perfectly still, but the boy lying on it is watching the architecture of reality dissolve. In the canonical record, decades from this night, the judgment of the pre-flood world is recorded as a storm. Genesis 7:11 marks the exact date. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Stop right there. Look at that phrase, the great deep. The English translation sounds like an ocean, but turn the text back into the Hebrew, and the word is tehom. It does not mean a large body of standing water. It means the primordial, chaotic, bottomless abyss. It is the exact same word used in Genesis 1-2, before light was even spoken into existence, when darkness was upon the face of the deep, tehom. When Noah stands on the ark, he watches the tehom violently burst upward through the crust of the earth, flooding the ground. But in the dark of his grandfather's house, a young Enoch is shown the exact inverse. He doesn't see the water rising. He sees the world falling, same abyss, different direction. Watch what the text does in 1 Enoch 83. The firmament crashes into the soil, and the earth itself fractures. The ground does not simply flood, it suffers a catastrophic structural failure. It sinks under a weight it can no longer bear. Verse 4 details the collapse. And when it fell upon the earth, I saw how the earth was swallowed up in a great abyss, and mountains were suspended on mountains, and hills sank down on hills. Picture it. The tectonic plates of the ancient world giving way. The highest peaks of the earth, the immovable mountains, unmoored and suspended in a void, crashing into one another as gravity itself seems to break. The earth is not being washed clean, it is being dismantled. But why? If the canonical flood was sent to wipe away the wickedness of man, why does Enoch's vision depict the very crust of the earth being shattered and discarded into the Tehom? Because the earth is infected. The Book of Jubilees, the ancient text that parallels the early chapters of Genesis, records that the pre-flood earth itself was corrupted. The ground was not a neutral stage, it had been compromised by what was walking on it. The soil had absorbed something foreign, and the roots of that infection went so deep that washing the surface would never be enough. The foundation itself had to be broken up. And as the hills sink down on the hills, Enoch's eyes are drawn to the epicenter of the collapse. He watches the physical crust of the earth tear open, revealing what is dragging the world into the dark, the high trees. First, Enoch 83-4 continues the sequence. As the mountains crash together, the towering timber of the earth is rent from their stems and hurled down and sunk in the abyss. Hold that image. The ground is shattering specifically so these massive trees can be ripped out by their roots. But what kind of forest requires the dismantling of a planet just to clear the timber? Look down into the fracture. The earth in Enoch's dream has split open, and the mountains are colliding in the void. But the judgment is not aimed at the rocks. It is aimed at the canopy. 1 Enoch 83, verse 4, details the violence. The high trees are rent from their stems, snapped at the base, torn from the soil and hurled into the abyss. Why focus on the timber? Because in the ancient Hebrew mind, a towering tree is almost never just biology. It is theology. It is a sovereign entity. In the canonical scriptures, the highest trees consistently represent kings, empires, and divine powers dominating the human landscape. Cross-reference the prophets. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 31. The text is describing a massive, terrifying power. Ezekiel 31-3 says, "Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches, and with a shadowing shroud, and of an high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. A cedar in Lebanon, a high tree." And what happens when God judges this entity? Ezekiel 31-16 records the exact same sequence Enoch saw on his grandfather's bed. "I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall, when I cast him down to hell with them that descend into the pit." Cast down to hell, hurled into the pit, same language, same judgment. Watch what the text does in Daniel chapter 4. King Nebuchadnezzar has a terrifying vision. He sees a tree in the midst of the earth, reaching to heaven, visible to the ends of the world. Then a watcher comes down from the sky and screams a command. Daniel 4:14 reads, "Hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit." Daniel tells the king exactly what the timber means. The tree is you. Trees are rulers. Trees are principalities. Sit with that. Look at Isaiah 14. The prophet mocks the fallen king of Babylon, another towering principality, and suddenly the actual trees of the forest start speaking. Isaiah 14:8 says, Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. The physical trees are relieved because the spiritual tree has been cut down. When young Enoch lies paralyzed in the dark, watching the high timber of the pre-flood world ripped from the dirt and thrown into the Tehom, he is not watching a logging operation. He is watching an exorcism. He is watching the violent removal of massive, deeply rooted entities that had taken over the canopy of the earth. These are beings of high stature. They cast a shadowing shroud over early humanity. Their roots are so inextricably intertwined with the physical crust of the world that tearing them out requires breaking the earth itself to pieces. This is not a rainstorm. It is a cosmic eviction notice. But a tree does not grow to that height overnight. It has to be planted. It has to take root in the dirt of the human world. So who exactly were the high trees of the early earth, and what kind of fruit were they dropping before the waters finally fell? Turn to the 6th chapter of Genesis. The canonical text gives us a single, terrifying snapshot of the pre-flood canopy. Genesis 6-4 reads, There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Read that again. Giants in the earth. The English translation flattens the horror. Go back to the Hebrew. The word used for giants is Nephilim. It is derived from the root verb naphal, which means to fall, to be cast down, or to cause to fall. They are the fallen ones, and they are the timber. Picture the boy Enoch in his dream, watching the tallest trees of the earth being violently uprooted. Now cross-reference that physical image with the prophet Amos. Centuries later, God is reminding Israel of the giants that once occupied the land of Canaan. Watch the exact language Amos 2-9 uses to describe them. Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots from beneath. Height like the cedars, strong as the oaks, destroyed from the roots. Same imagery, same entities. Enoch is not watching a literal forest burn. He is watching the Nephilim and their fathers, the Watchers, being eradicated from the physical plane. 1 Enoch chapter 6 grounds this invasion in a real geographic location. It records that 200 angelic beings, the sons of God from Genesis 6, descended on the summit of Mount Hermon. They bound themselves by a mutual curse. They took human wives, and they planted a seed that the earth was never meant to hold. That seed grew. 1 Enoch 7 says these women bare great giants, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. I offer this as their telling, not as proven fact, but look at how perfectly it locks into the boy's nightmare. A tree that large does not just stand in a forest, it dominates it. It starves every other living thing around it. Its roots siphon all the water. Its branches block out the sun. The human race in Genesis 6 was being choked out by a canopy of rogue, hybridized entities. The Nephilim were the towering cedars, and the Watchers were the deep, corrupt root system anchored in the rock of Mount Hermon. But where do you throw a tree that size once you finally pull it out? 1 Enoch 10 gives the exact destination. The Most High commands the Archangel Raphael regarding one of the chief watchers, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein. An opening in the earth, the Tehom, the exact abyss where the young Enoch sees the timber being hurled. You cannot prune an empire like that. You cannot simply chop off the branches and leave the stump. If the root remains in the soil, the infection survives. To save the earth, the gardener has to shatter the ground, tear the entity out by its roots, and throw the whole corrupted mass into the dark, torn from their stems, and hurled into the abyss. That is the judgment Enoch is forced to witness before it ever happens. The total, violent uprooting of the fallen ones. But as the mountains crash together and the timber is thrown into the deep, the vision abruptly changes. The towering entities that choked the ancient world have been hurled into the abyss, leaving a fractured, sinking earth in their wake. But as the cosmic dust settles in his grandfather's house, the paralysis breaks, and Enoch's own voice tears through the dark. What happens when a boy wakes up screaming that the world has ended, and the patriarch sitting next to his bed tells him he is exactly right? The paralysis breaks. The boy lunges upward in the dark, gasping for the air of a world that, in his mind, has already been swallowed by the deep. First, Enoch, chapter 83, verse 5, records the exact moment the nightmare releases him. But it does not release him into peace. And thereupon I fell down and I cried with a great voice and said, "The earth is destroyed." Picture the room. The absolute stillness of Mahalalel's house is shattered by the scream of a young man who has just watched the architecture of creation collapse. The grandfather, the fourth patriarch in the canonical line from Adam, rushes in. Verse 6 records the older man's urgent question. "Why dost thou cry so, my son? And why dost thou make such lamentation? Sit with that." Enoch is trembling on the floor. He recounts every detail, the heavens falling, the mountains suspended in the void, and the high trees, the towering, deeply rooted corruption of the pre-flood canopy, violently torn from the soil and hurled into the abyss. When a child wakes from a nightmare, the natural instinct of a father or grandfather is to comfort them, to tell them it was only a dream, that the monsters aren't real, that the foundation of the house is solid. But Mahalalel does not comfort him. Watch what the text does. 1 Enoch 83 verse 7. The old patriarch listens to the vision of the falling trees, recognizes exactly what the boy has seen, and pronounces a chilling confirmation. "A terrible thing hast thou seen, my son, and of grave moment is thy dream vision as to the secrets of all the sin of the earth. It must sink into the abyss and be destroyed with a great destruction." Read that again. It must sink into the abyss. Mahalalel validates the horror. He looks at his young grandson and tells him that the nightmare is not a trick of the mind. It is a divine blueprint. The decree has gone out. The earth is infected by the fallen timber, and the only cure is a total, catastrophic extraction. I offer this as that. One tradition's record of a prophet being born. And it perfectly mirrors the canonical pattern of men breaking under the weight of future judgment. Cross-reference the book of Daniel. Centuries later, Daniel receives a vision of horrific beasts and the trampling of the earth. How does the biblical text record his physical reaction to the unseen realm? Daniel 8:27 says, "And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Fainted and was sick, astonished at the vision." Prophecy is not a parlor trick. It is psychological trauma. When you are shown the end of your world, it fractures you. You can never look at the sky or the trees or the ground the exact same way again. Enoch is suddenly living on a ticking clock. Every step he takes outside his grandfather's house is on dirt he knows is slated for the bottomless Tehom. Every giant he sees, every towering corruption of Genesis 6, he knows is already marked for the abyss. This is the exact trauma that triggers the sudden, obsessive pivot in Genesis 5. This is why an ordinary man suddenly begins to walk relentlessly with God for 3 centuries. He knows the ground is about to give way. But as the shock of Mahalalel's confirmation settles in the dark room, the young man realizes something even more terrifying. If the earth is completely dismantled to clear the high trees, what happens to his own bloodline? Enoch is staring at the total annihilation of humanity, and he refuses to let it end there. But how does a boy intercede for a dying planet when the decree of judgment has already been spoken? The boy on the floor does not stay paralyzed. Enoch wipes the cold sweat from his face in the dark of Mahalalel's house. He knows the decree is sealed. The earth will shatter. The abyss will open. The towering timber of the watchers will be violently torn from the soil. But instead of yielding to despair, the young man does exactly what another patriarch will do centuries later on a hill overlooking Sodom. He argues with the judgment. Cross-reference Genesis 18:23. And Abraham drew near and said, "Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked?" Abraham bargained with the Creator for a single city. Enoch is bargaining for a planet. He is looking at a world swallowed by the corruption of the fallen ones, and he realizes that a total erasure of the surface is imminent. See the scene. The grandfather sits quietly as the boy lifts his hands in the dark. First, Enoch chapter 84 records the exact prayer the young prophet screams into the void. Verse 5 is the turning point of human history. "And now, my angels, wipe out from the earth the flesh which has aroused thy anger, but the flesh of righteousness and uprightness establish as a plant of the eternal seed, and hide not thy face from the prayer of thy servant, O Lord." Stop right there. Look at the specific words he uses. A plant of the eternal seed. The botanical imagery continues. The giants and the fallen angels are the high trees, the towering cedars that choked the pre-flood canopy. They are slated to be hurled into the Tehom. But Enoch is not asking God to spare the high trees. He is asking the Creator to protect a single, vulnerable shoot. He is praying for the bloodline. In the canonical Hebrew text of Genesis, the word for seed is zerah. It does not just mean agricultural grain. It means offspring. It is the exact word God uses in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3:15. "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." The war of the seeds. Read that again. The Watchers descended on Mount Hermon and planted their own corrupt zerah into the human race. They grew the high trees to overwrite the promise of Eden. Enoch realizes that if the earth is totally dismantled to pull out the massive roots of the Nephilim, the human zerah might be swept into the abyss with them. The promise of the crushed serpent would drown in the deep. So the boy begs for a remnant. I offer this as that. One tradition's record of a forgotten intercession. But look at how perfectly it snaps the canonical text into focus. Genesis 5:21 suddenly carries the weight of a rescued world. "And Enoch lived 65 years, and begat Methuselah." This is not just a biological birth record. It is an answered prayer. Methuselah is the seed. He is the first leaf of the plant God promised to leave behind when the high trees finally fell. It is Methuselah who will father Lamech, and Lamech who will father Noah. Genesis 6-9 will later describe Noah as perfect in his generations. The Hebrew word is tamiim, physically unblemished, his bloodline uncorrupted by the towering timber. He is the direct result of the plant Enoch begged for on the floor of Mahalalel's house. The Creator heard the boy and granted the remnant, but God does not just give Enoch a son, He gives him a living condition. The bloodline is saved, but the earth is still scheduled for the abyss. And the very son given as an answer to prayer is about to become the countdown clock for the destruction of the world. What happens when a prophet names his child not just for a blessing, but as a walking, breathing prophecy of the exact year the trees will fall? Enoch holds the infant in his arms. He is 65 years old. The nightmare of the falling trees is still fresh in his mind. He has begged for a remnant, a plant of the eternal seed to survive the breaking of the world, and the Creator has placed that seed directly into his hands. But a prophetic birth requires a prophetic name. Genesis 5:21 records the moment. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. Stop right there. Look at the name the young patriarch chooses. In English, Methuselah is just a heavy, ancient word, a cultural synonym for old age. But take it back into the Hebrew. The name is a compound of two distinct roots. The first is mut, which means death, or to die. The second is shalach, which means to send, to bring, or to release. When he dies, it is sent. His death shall bring it. Read that again. Enoch did not just name his son. He named the deadline. He looked at the fragile boy, remembered the towering timber of the watchers being hurled into the bottomless Tehom, and permanently attached the judgment of the earth to his own child's pulse. This is not an assumption. Watch the math of the canonical text. Genesis chapter 5 lays out the strict chronological timeline of the bloodline. Verse 25 says, "And Methuselah lived 187 years, and begat Lamech." Hold that number, 187. Verse 28 continues, "And Lamech lived 182 years, and begat a son, and he called his name Noah." Add that to the first. 187 plus 182 equals 369. Now, cross-reference Genesis 7-6. The canonical text locks the final date into the record, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. Take the 369 years before Noah's birth, and add the 600 years of Noah's life before the storm. The sum is 969. Now go back to the graveyard toll of Genesis 5:27. "And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died." The exact year. Methuselah died in the very year the waters came. Picture the boy growing up. Every cough, every fever, every close call with the violent giants of the pre-flood world sends a shockwave of terror through Enoch's camp. Because Enoch knows the truth. The breath in his son's lungs is the only dam holding back the abyss. As long as the boy lives, the earth stands. The moment his chest stops rising, the sky will fall, the crust will shatter, and the high trees will be ripped from the dirt. This is the secret behind the longest lifespan in the Bible. Methuselah did not live for 969 years simply because ancient genetics were purer. He lived that long because the Creator was stretching his mercy to the absolute breaking point. God delayed the uprooting of the earth until the very last second of that single man's natural life. And this is exactly why Enoch abruptly begins to walk with God in Genesis 5:22. He is a man living with a ticking clock in his own house. For 300 years, his devotion is not casual. It is absolute, unbroken, militant. He is pacing the floor of a condemned world, alongside the God who condemned it, watching the Nephilim thrive, knowing their roots are already dead. But Enoch will not see the end of his own countdown. The timeline is set, the remnant is secured. The high trees are marked for the dark, and the boy named his death shall bring it is slowly growing into a man. But the canonical text is about to violently break its own rhythm. If the earth is still standing, why does the prophet who saw the blueprints of its destruction suddenly vanish from the physical plane? Go back to the graveyard toll of Genesis chapter 5. Adam died. Seth died. Enos died. Stop at the seventh man. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. You have read that verse your entire life. If you grew up in the West, You have been taught to picture a peaceful departure, a quiet walk into the sunset, where the Creator simply invites a holy man across the threshold of eternity, a reward for good behavior. But picture it now. Put the man back on the earth he actually walked, a world choked by the towering timber of the Watchers, a crust infected by the roots of the Nephilim, a planet carrying a divine death sentence. For 300 years, Enoch has paced the floor of this condemned world, watching the canopy thicken, watching his son Methuselah grow, knowing that the boy's final breath is the trigger for the abyss. Enoch doesn't just wander off, he is pulled out. Watch what the canonical text does with the language. The Hebrew word in Genesis 5:24 for took is lakach. It does not mean a gentle invitation. It means to seize, to snatch away, to violently extract something before it can be consumed. Read that again. Lakach. God seized him. Cross-reference the book of Genesis, chapter 19. The angels have arrived in Sodom. The fire is about to fall, and Lot is hesitating. Verse 16 says, "And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth, and set him without the city." The angels seized him. Same danger, same extraction. The seventh patriarch wasn't taking a leisurely stroll. He was operating in hostile territory. He was the only man on earth who knew exactly how the high trees were going to fall. He had seen the firmament shatter on his grandfather's bed. He knew the Tehom was waiting just beneath the dirt. And as the violence of Genesis 6 reached its absolute peak, the Creator looked at the man who had carried the burden of the end of the world for 3 centuries, and he extracted him from the blast radius. He was not. For God snatched him. I offer this as one reading, a bridge between the suppressed nightmare of an ancient apocryphal book and the absolute canonical silence of Genesis. I am not rewriting your Bible. I am asking you to look at the shadows the verses are casting. We know exactly why he started walking with God. We know exactly what he saw falling into the deep. And we know his son's final heartbeat shattered the firmament. But Genesis still guards the silence of his final day. The text leaves the exact moment of his extraction in the dark. Did the Watchers finally turn their eyes on the prophet who knew their doom? Did Enoch feel the first tremor of the earth giving way before he was seized? The canonical record seals its lips. The desert is still holding the rest of the mystery. But the next time you read the genealogy of the early earth, do not read his disappearance as a peaceful exit. Read it as a rescue. A man who saw the world end before it began, safely removed just before the timber finally hit the ground. If this shift in the text changed how you see the pre-flood world, do 3 things for me. Comment the word "watch" down below, subscribe to the channel for more biblical anomalies, and send this video to one person who loves studying the days of Noah, but has never heard the nightmare of the falling trees. The waters washed the earth, but the roots are what broke it.